Good. So, yes, so welcome to, as I said, I'm Claus and I'm here with Sarah, and we're going to share with you 3 secrets around how to upgrade dialogue in life, really. But we focus on organizations. But one of the wonderful things about the dialogue tools that we are going to talk about is that it can be used everywhere. So we're just going to start with saying a little bit about presenting ourselves. I think some of you I know, some of you know Sarah, and some of you are probably new here. So my name is Klaus, and I found the dialogue tools while I was doing my PhD at Cranfield on leadership development, and immediately fell in love with it. The thing I like about it is that the tools are very simple. So they're easy to remember, but they open the possibility for great psychological depth. So you can, by using these tools, you can have the kind of conversations that you really need to have. And I find that so fascinating. So now I use these tools everywhere. Sometimes together with Sarah, I teach the dialogue tools directly. And when I teach courses on leadership or entrepreneurship or something like that at Copenhagen Business School, I always try to sneak in these tools. And every single time I do it, it's a real eye-opener for the students. And of course, not just the students, it's also when I do one-to-one executive coaching or something like that. It is also one of the tools that really has a great impact every single time we use it. So I'm very excited about being here and sharing some of these tools with you. So yeah, so maybe Sarah, if you want to say a little something.
Thank you, Klaus, and good morning, everybody. Warm welcome. It's great to see some familiar faces. Some of you I know, and some of us we're meeting for the first time here. So delighted that you've made it. And along with Klaus, I share great enthusiasm for these tools, and I use them day in, day out in my work. I'm often on the corporate pitch, coaching teams, and good dialogue. Getting the honest conversation in the room is really at the heart of what I do. I'll just share briefly how I came across this approach. It's about 15 years ago now. I was working at the Cabinet Office here in the UK as a psychologist, and we had a complex recruitment challenge. We had about 15,000 graduates applying for 400 places. And what we were doing, in effect, was really bringing in the experts to redesign that recruitment process. But I went on a training program, going back to Bill Isaacs and his book, Dialogue and the Art of Thinking Together. He's one of the thought leaders in this space, and I went on to work with Bill a few years later for a number of years. But I went on a training program run by one of his colleagues, and I just had this light bulb moment. And I thought, wow, if we could access the collective intelligence here at the Cabinet Office of the civil servants, we wouldn't be chasing the expert. We'd be designing our own solutions that would be a really good cultural fit for that recruitment process. And we went on to do some of that work. And then actually I left a few months later to really follow this passion for helping teams and individuals have better dialogue. So that's just a bit of a flavour of where I'm coming from. And I'm going to hand back to Klaus, because I think, Klaus, you might give us a bit of an overview of what's coming up here.
So what we're going to talk about here today are, as I said, it's 3 secrets. So it is how to increase the productivity of any dialogue. That's the first thing. Sarah is going to talk a little bit about that. And then it is how to use dialogue to save time. Many of us, one of the reasons we say, well, this dialogue thing, is it really, do I have time for it, right? It seems to take a lot of time, but actually you can use it to save a lot of time. And the last one is how to turn the difficult conversation into a productive conversation, and especially when you're talking to people that you think are, again, quote unquote, difficult people, the kind of people you don't find pleasurable interacting with. Often they can be the ones that when you do engage with them in a skillful way, it's the most productive conversations. So, but let's start with the first one. So how to increase the productivity of any conversation? What's the way to do that? So yeah, Sarah, do you want to say something about that?
Sure, yes. So in a moment, I'm going to ask Klaus to put this tool up on a screen because I think it will be easier. But I'll just say a few words about it. This comes from the work of a chap called David Cantor, who's written a number of books, a recent one, Reading the Room. And what he means by the phrase reading the room is how can you as a leader or perhaps as a parent, when a conversation's starting to get stuck or go off the rails, how can you get a quick fix on understanding why that might be, and then even more importantly, intervene in the conversation to refocus it. And where we're going with this is that there are basically four, they're sometimes called speech acts or action positions that are present in a healthy, productive dialogue. And in an unhealthy conversation or a stuck conversation, one or more of these actions goes missing. And so the skillful thing to do is to notice which one is missing and to bring that in, or to invite others to bring it in. So as I say, 4 speech acts, and I'm just going to talk you through them briefly, and then we're going to, I think, tell a story about where we've seen them missing and the difference it makes to bring one in. So Klaus, could you please put up the slide that's got the 4 actions on it? So 4 dialogic actions, and they all do something different. So if you look at that one, we've got a diamond, on the diamond shape at the top, there's making a move. And in a conversation, you're voicing something, and it might be something quite simple. Let's talk about, I don't know, next year's budget, or we could talk about what time you got home last night if you're talking to your teenager. That's making a move, and it brings a sense of direction. If I come to the bottom of the diamond, the oppose it speaks for itself. This is a speech act, it's an action where you're disagreeing, you're pushing back, you're challenging. You can also see the word there, respecting, because in a healthy dialogue, we absolutely want there to be opposition, but done in a respectful way. So we might be opposing the idea rather than the person. And Sarah was speaking a moment ago about increasing polarization, and absolutely, Sarah, and I think what happens a lot in organizations and in the public square is a movement between move, oppose, move, oppose, move, oppose. And I think a lot of old school leadership would say that the leader is the one who makes the move or makes the opposes. But that's not the full story. As you can see here, there are 2 other actions to bring into a conversation. And in the work of David Cantor, when he observed family systems over a whole time period and really looked at the empirical data, in healthy systems, we also see the action of a follow, which would be when you verbally agree, show enthusiasm, show support for what somebody else is saying. And of course, we've got to be listening, we've got to be present in order to do that authentically. And I sometimes think that that's the least rated of all the 4 actions, the follow. But it injects real positivity into a conversation, especially if we're getting stuck in the polarized move, oppose, move, oppose. And then finally, there is the action of bystanding, which is when you're suspending your judgment, suspending your certainty that you're right, and you're putting things in a larger context, or you're seeing the bigger picture by making a bystand. It's sort of taking a little bit of a step back and bringing in some kind of observation or making a comment that's got some degree of neutrality to it. So those are our 4 actions in dialogue, and for very good reasons. They sometimes go missing, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with the notion of psychological safety. And if there isn't enough safety in the room, then, for example, people might not feel able to oppose. That might just feel too risky. And when any of these goes missing, it becomes problematic. So we do want to share an example or 2 with you, but let me just pause there. Klaus, is there anything you want to add to that description?
I think this is really pretty much it. You have these 4 speech acts, and I think that what is really the eye opener for me is this to say it's about having a balance of all of them. So any of them missing is gonna be a problem.
Yeah. So maybe I'll just share a story then of when I saw something missing and then the difference that it made when it came into the conversation. So I'll tell the story, and then just to say you're really welcome to share your reflections, your comments. Again, you could use the chat box, and also maybe after the story, if you want to unmute yourself, love to hear your voices. But yes, this goes back to a few years ago, and I was working with a large team. It was a central government department in the UK, about 30 people in the room, different grades, and they'd been talking about the team's vision, but there was also anxiety about future job cuts. Anyway, my job in the morning was just to observe, see how the conversation ran. And just before we took a break for lunch, I introduced that model, that framework of those 4 actions, and I invited them to read the room. What had they noticed in the conversation that morning? And quite accurately, they said, oh, we've had loads of moves, quite a lot of opposes, a few follows, but no bystands. And that to me was an accurate reading. So I said, would somebody be willing to make an observation, make a bystand now? And there was a pause. And then one of the most junior people in the team, who had also been around for a long time, said, we've had exactly the same conversation this morning that we've had at every single away day for the last 7 years. Okay, that was his bystand. And there was an even longer pause. And what that meant was that when we got to lunchtime, I got into a huddle with the team leader and a couple of other people, and we decided to jettison the agenda for the afternoon and invite people when they came back from lunch for their thoughts on what's the conversation we really need to be having this afternoon. And I won't go into the detail of how we did that, but we then surfaced the question that they really needed to talk about. So that's the difference that a bystand can make. I sometimes think the language is unfortunate from David Cantor. A bystand is not something passive, and a whole meeting can pivot on the basis of a bystand coming in when that wider perspective has been missing. So that's the story of the missing bystand. Klaus, I don't know if you want to bring in another story or put some questions for reflection here. Oh, you're on mute, Klaus.
Yeah, no, I think it's very interesting, right? It's like it's a good example, this with a missing bystand. I have a short story of a missing bystand, which was kind of funny. It was a senior management team who was meeting, and they one of the decisions on the agenda was to select what kind of parking space that they had acquired a new building, and they were like, should we acquire like a parking lot also, or should we like give people tickets so that we just pay for people's parking? Or so they had to make a decision around that. And there was a lot of opinions in the room, right? Everybody had an opinion about it, and they discussed it at length until somebody said, look, the difference between the cheapest and the most expensive option is really negligible, but we have just spent an hour of the senior management time discussing it, which is far more pricey. And then we're like, okay, just pick A and then move on. I thought it was a quite a nice bystand, right? Otherwise, they could have gone on with the conversation, and it really wasn't worth it. So, but I think some of the if you when you think about this, then it can be quite interesting to ask yourself the questions: do you experience a lack of propositions or initiative in your organization? If you do, then maybe people are not doing enough moves. They're not proposing things. Do you find that people just pick the best option, and there's not enough quality opposition so that the projects do not get strong enough when they're developed? Then opposition, respectful opposition, is missing. And there can be a lot of reasons for that. Or maybe you experience that you have a lot of propositions or opposition, boom, 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 back and forth, but it's a little bit polarized kind of discussions, right? So people aren't really following up on each other's ideas, taking them further, developing them, see what you can make of it. It's like a lot of proposition, and they go like, yeah, but. Or maybe your conversations, you feel there's a lot of time pressure, and you don't get the bigger picture. Like, for example, you are having the discussion, but nobody says, this is the discussion that we've had for the last 7 years. Maybe there's another discussion that we need to have. And then a last question that you can ask yourself to explore this is, what are you most comfortable with, and what are you least comfortable with? Some people will find making moves very comfortable, following not so comfortable. Other people, it's the other way around. So these are some of the questions you can reflect on to pick up this. The secret of how to save time. And I think this is more to say, many of us have, again, maybe a short survey here. How many feel that the having dialogues, how many have experienced that they have held back from having a dialogue because they feel they didn't have time for it? Okay, yes. It's a very common thing to say, well, you know, we should have it, but I have a to-do list. It's very long, and everything on it is kind of urgent and really important. So the dialogue get pushed to the bottom of the list. Now, once I was working with a transportation company. I will not mention which one, but a transportation company, and I was working with the customs department. So when they move packages around, of course, sometimes packages have to be cleared in customs before they can deliver it to the customers. And it's a high pressure. You have to, because everybody wants their packages delivered like today. So sometimes it can be very high pressured. And in Denmark, at least, you cannot send in the customs declaration before the package has arrived in the country. So basically, between the plane lands or the truck crosses the border and the package is at the end user, you have to have made and sent in the customs declaration and gotten an approval from the customs department. So they have systems for that to help them with that. And there was, usually it works very nicely. But at this time in this transportation company, there was a certain kind of packages that always got stuck in the system. And the people who were sitting in the customs department, they had to do a lot of manual faffing about in order to clear these packages. And there was the time pressure because the truck drivers was like, can we go now? Can we go now? Right, we want to go and deliver the packages. And so it was very stressful. And they had tried to talk about this and get the central, the IT guys to fix this problem. And they had sent one ticket after another to the industrial engineering head of Europe there and said, like, look, we have this problem. Can you please fix it for us? And this had been going on for a number of years. And if you add up how many, and it hadn't been fixed. And so they had spent a lot of time on this. They had spent the time the extra working hours, and they had spent all the time just talking about trying to explain the issue, then saying now, then trying to do something, say now we've solved it, but they hadn't really solved it. And this was an example of they didn't sit down and have a dialogue about it, right? They just sent the mails back and forth, the tickets and this thing back and forth. At one point, the head of industrial engineering comes from the head of industrial engineering in Europe comes to visit the center in Denmark. And I insist you have to go and talk to the people in the customs department, and they have to show you on the screen what's wrong. And I had prepped the people there to say, every single day, show me what is wrong on the screen so that when this guy comes, you've got like 10 minutes and you have to be able to show it. And so they were prepared. And of course, what happened was what was expected, right? He comes and he has a lot of stuff. He's got like 2 days in Denmark, and there's a lot of people who want to talk to him and a lot of things on his agenda. And he comes to me and says, Claus, you know, this, I know that you want me to talk to them, but can we postpone it? And I said, absolutely not. So I drag him in there, sit him down in front of the computer and say, now you can have this dialogue. 10 minutes later, he comes over to me and says, now I get it. Few days later, it was fixed, right? It took literally 10 minutes of dialogue to fix something. And instead of taking those 10 minutes, if they had taken those 10 minutes like a few years before, they would have saved hundreds of hours. So this is an example of how dialogue really can save time. But you have to create that space for it. You have to have that setup, create that container where it's like, now we just sit down and have the talk, but we're not in a hurry. We do this. But it can really, really, really save a lot of time. So I'm curious, in order to illustrate this, many times I talk about, when I talk to managers, I will say to them, have you ever given an assignment to an employee, and then they came back 1 week later and show you what they have done, and it was absolutely not what you wanted? 80% of managers or more will say, oh, yes, happens all the time. And I think that's extremely telling, because if it happens all the time, then spending 5 more minutes to clarify to have a dialogue around the task, clarify expectations might be very helpful. Having small dialogues in between might be very helpful. So you don't have to waste that 1 week, right? Maybe you would have gotten the result you wanted after just 1 week instead of 2 or 3 or 4. And I think it's interesting because when you set it up like that, many people have this tendency to say, yeah, oh, there are those employees, right? They don't do what I tell them to. But of course, immediately it falls back on yourself. And you say, well, if it happens over and over and over again, maybe a little bit more dialogue from if you insist on a little more dialogue, it would help a lot. Yeah, secret theory is how to have conversation with people where you do not expect, you don't see eye to eye, you don't expect this conversation to go very well. And often with people where your perception of them is they are not quite in touch with reality, at least not reality as you see it, right? There's that real discrepancy between how you see things and how the other person is seeing things. So this is basically relating to how to oppose in a respectful way. And this is one of the most beautiful things about this tool. How do you oppose somebody in a respectful way when you think that they are nuts, right? When you think that they are bonkers. And I mean, that happens, right? Sometimes you sit with people and you go like, oh, I can't talk to this person, they're crazy. But that is not particularly productive to say that. And I mean, sometimes we think it, right? It's like, if I can only convince this person that they are nuts and they see the light, then everything would be better, right? It's amazing how often we engage in dialogue from that perspective, even though I would say probably no one has ever experienced success with that strategy. So the story I want to tell here to illustrate this is an interesting one. It's I was working with some people who their job was that they would go out into elementary schools and talk to students and parents about alcohol consumption. So there's a lot of research that shows that the later kids start drinking alcohol, the better. Is that there's a whole host of problems that will be solved if you can just push that starting point. And it's almost like the later the better. And so the way that they want to do this, instead of just going out and say, like, you know, you should do, they can't really tell parents to tell their kids not to drink, but they can go out into schools and have conversations about it. And this is also to facilitate a conversation where the parents and the students agree on some ground rules that will be valid across everybody in the class. That's much easier than if one person can't drink and the other one can, you know, bring a bottle of whiskey or whatever to every party. So what they say, every time when they go out, they will always meet a certain kind of character. They will always meet certain parents who say something along the lines of, I started drinking when I was 6 and it's never done me any harm, and that's fine. And also they will back up their claim and they say, you know, putting down boundaries for your kids doesn't work. Look at, I don't know, Sheila or whatever. Her parents are the strictest parents in the whole class, and she's the one that drinks the most, right? So that kind of stuff. And then when the people say, well, the research says, then they will say, I don't believe in the research. And so this poses a bit of a challenge, right? How do you start a dialogue there? They know that the position is factually wrong. The research is quite solid on the point, but stating that doesn't help. So how do you engage in that? And in dialogue, one of the things that we talk about is to say, if people say something, there is something there. There is something, there's a gold nugget somewhere, even if what they say is factually wrong, even if what they say isn't formulating the gold nugget. Now, when we had a dialogue among the team, and I played a little bit the devil's advocate, so I said something like, you know, I asked the question, what might their speech act point to, which is true? And I think especially the example that they would give when they say Sheila is the one that drinks the most, even though her parents are the strictest, that's a clue. Because if you listen to this and you listen behind the words and you say, what is the concern here? You say, there is something about saying, if I put down very strict rules for my kids, maybe I break the relationship to my kids. Maybe they will no longer listen to me and they just go off and I lose any influence on them. And you can say, well, the concern of preserving a good relationship to your children and through that having influence on them, that's a valid concern. So it might be that all the things that, you know, I started drinking at 6, never did me any harm, and all these kind of things, and I don't believe in this in the research. All of that, sure, that's not quite true. But when you listen beneath the surface and you say, where is it coming from? It's coming from a concern that is worth taking into account. When you acknowledge that, then you change the question or the whole dialogue. The moment we acknowledge that, the whole dialogue changed. Rather than saying, what are the boundaries that should be put on children's drinking habits? The question became, how do we put boundaries on children's drinking habits in a way that preserve the close relationship? And that's a much better question. So can you see, instead, if we had just dismissed this person as being a bit crazy, then we wouldn't have received that gold nugget. Even though what they said was a bit off, when we listened to it and listened underneath the surface, then it brought something to the dialogue that upgraded the whole dialogue, that significantly enhanced the kind of questions we were discussing. So this is a way where you can have like real treasure from not dismissing people, especially when they say something that seems incomprehensible to you. And this relates very much back to, if you take that back to a more, maybe a more common organizational setting, leaders, managers will all the time be in a situation where they have to shoot down somebody's pet project, right? Somebody really want to do something and you have to stop them because it doesn't fit the strategy or for whatever reason. And the question then is, how do you do that in a way so that you still preserve a good relationship? Once I worked with a manager who was sitting in a central analysis unit in a big oil company. And she said, when you had they have like teams who have portfolios of oil drillings, and they might send like 10 sites to central analysis, and then they will analyze the data. And she says, generally 1 in 10 sites will give return on investment. The rest, there might be oil, but it's going to be so expensive to extract it that we're never going to make any money on it. So 1 in 10 sites are going to be useful. Whereas the portfolio holders, they usually think 9 in 10 will give return on investment. They're very enthusiastic and optimistic. And this was a similar process where we exactly said, well, how do you go to a portfolio holder and say, it's not 9, it's 1, and still preserve a good working relationship? She was in a situation where, because she just went to them and say, you guys are crazy, they said, no, I think you're crazy. And they had started buying up land and starting drilling in places where she knows this is never going to give return on investment. Hugely expensive for the company. So again, here, that's that good question. How do you engage with people who say things that you think are a bit nutty in a way so that you can extract that nugget of gold? And when she did it, she realized a lot of things about, she actually came to really value their enthusiasm, their optimism, their drive. It's like, if you want to go for a couple of years to a faraway drilling site and work there, you might have a little bit of passion also for doing something good for the local population and creating jobs and all these kind of things, which are extremely valuable. And she started appreciating that. And once she appreciated it, it gave her the capacity to oppose in more respectful and productive ways. So yeah. So that is that's a little bit about how to do that.
One question, Sarah, that I find works really well in corporate environments where people don't want to be touchy-feely is the question, what's the energy you're stepping in with? Like, you know, not asking about feelings, we're asking about energy. And I say to people, and if it's enthusiasm, great, but if it's skepticism, let's hear that. Like, it's all welcome here. And that's just one simple way of starting to get some safety in the room. And that starts to build the container for dialogue. And then, Ruth, if I may, just back to your question, you know, how do you move forward when people are invested in not changing? How do you get from all that talking, great ideas, into some action? So again, it's a set of 2 questions that I found has worked really well with groups. I did this with a group of 80 at a bank in India, where there was real resistance to moving forward with a strategy. The strategy was a done deal, but what they could have a conversation was how to operationalize the strategy. And the questions that I used were, what's at risk if we make this change? Okay, and then you get all the voices out and all of that. And then the second question is, and what's at risk if we don't make this change? You know, so 2 takes on the what's at risk. And actually, if you've started to get a safe container in the room, my experience is you can have a really productive dialogue framed in that way. Okay, yeah. Cool.
So I'll be very excited, hopefully, to hear about what you get out of that. But just maybe to sum up a little bit, this was a presentation. I hope it was useful to hear a little bit about dialogue tools and get some inspiration about what is possible to do with it, how it can. When you learn these tools, it can the diagnosing what speech act is missing. You can use that across the board, any dialogue. Having at the back of your mind, when I think the dialogue is going to take too much time, just think about how much time it will take not to have the dialogue. A little bit like Sarah's questions, right? What's the risk of having the dialogue? It takes time, but what's the risk of not having the dialogue? Maybe it takes even more time. And then this curiosity where you say, the crazy people, right? The people that you think you don't want to have a dialogue with, maybe some real nuggets of gold are right there. Maybe that's the treasure map, right? That you can find something there. And of course, we do this work. And if you're interested in learning more, Bill Isaac's book is a fantastic place to start. And if you're interested in getting me and Sarah's help with learning more of these skills, we're very happy to have conversations with you. You can just write to either of us. We'll send out a mail after this with our email addresses. We're very happy to have one-to-one conversations where we can talk about how we might help you learn some of these, or your team learn some of these skills. And yeah, Sarah, do you want to add something?
Maybe just, so delighted to have a follow-up conversation with any of you, as Claus has said. And, you know, having worked in this space for about 20 years, I remain so enthusiastic about it, because there are a wealth of tools and frameworks out there. And I've seen the difference they make to individuals, to teams, time and time again. You know, I've seen broken teams become much more cohesive, but I've also seen really good teams become great and even exceptional by really strengthening their communication. And that really excites me. So very happy to share the learning, share the enthusiasm. And thank you for coming this morning. Thanks for spending an hour with us here.
Yes, and maybe the last thing to say is we'll send a link out, but we have an open longer work, no, open 2-day workshop coming up. But so if anybody's interested in that, then we will send a link out to you. But yes, thank you for this morning. Wonderful seeing all of you, and have a lovely day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.